that was attended supposedly by Clay Shaw, by Lee Harvey Oswald, and David Ferry at Ferry's apartment. And the witness in this case, who also attended the party, Perry Russo, said that they discussed an assassination of John Kennedy.
I went up there and walked up his spiral staircase, up the steps, and I met Oswald. I had met Shaw. I met Shaw there. I had seen Shaw before and was introduced. There were several Cubans. We talked about different things, and Ferry was in a heated mood. He came up with ideas on assassinating Castro. He came up with ideas on assassinating Kennedy and blame it on somebody that likes Castro.
And the conspiracy under the law is the same as committing a murder. It was my jurisdiction, New Orleans. It was my duty to locate and prosecute anybody in New Orleans that had something to do with assassination, and I got somebody when we got Clay Shaw.
Up until this point, Jim's investigation had been conducted in entire secrecy. It was funded by publicly accountable funds, and they had used about $8,000. An enterprising young reporter, Rosemary James, had tracked the accounts and had found out that money had been used for the Kennedy investigation.
Dave Snyder and I, who was also a reporter for the States Item, spent quite a bit of time in talking to people, and eventually we had enough for a story.
It goes public. And once they decide that it's on the JFK plot, the entire press of the Western world descends on New Orleans. The second thing that happens is that David Ferry mysteriously dies about a week later.
The circumstances of his death to this day have never been satisfactorily explained. And he had a direct link to Oswald. He had a link to Clay Shaw.
Jim made what he called a command decision. That was to arrest Clay Shaw and charge him with conspiring to murder the president. I think he felt that he didn't have quite the case that he would have liked to if he had been able to keep it secret. But since he had been forced into the public eye, he wanted to make sure he had Clay Shaw before Clay Shaw mysteriously disappeared.
Quiet! All right, Phil, will you start again?
Mr. Shaw is in custody at this time. I said the arrest was made in this office. Mr. Shaw is still here.
I don't want to comment in any way on Mr. Shaw because I want to lean over backwards, not to infringe on any of his rights.
I think it was most evil bringing in an innocent man, Clay Shaw, and pillaring him in the public eye, or attempting to, and causing him great difficulties, of course.
Garrison's main theory is that it was a branch of the CIA that had more or less decided to do this on their own. Shaw, it turns out, had a long record of contacts with the CIA.
Later on, we found out that Shaw was a CIA man, that in fact he had been a colonel in the OSS during World War II.
I know he was the director of at the International Trade Mart, where we had information that he was involved with the CIA. In fact, I was told that by Dave Ferry.
Clay Shaw was arrested on March 1st, 1967. Jim was under a great deal of pressure, and what he did was he presented his case before a grand jury, and the grand jury returned an indictment against Shaw on charges of conspiring to murder the president. At that point, strange things began happening in Jim's office. He found that the FBI had bugged his offices. Everywhere Jim traveled, FBI was following him.
We were so naive, we were like children. The office had been thoroughly penetrated, and in many cases files were missing, and in other cases files were turned over wholesale amounts to the defense. They had more of our files than we had when the case started.
Got no cooperation at all from the FBI. Tried to get different witnesses before our grand jury to testify under oath, which were blocked by the federal government.
Mr. Garrison, do you feel that your case has really been hurt by this lack of cooperation with the federal government?
As to preventing us from being successful, there's no chance in the world. I'm sure that they think they can.
It was in March of 1967 that Clay Shaw was charged with conspiring to kill President Kennedy. Now, almost 2 years later, Shaw will go on trial here in this building tomorrow morning.
The trial took place in February of 1969, lasted a month. There were a lot of witnesses. The world press again came down to New Orleans, and it was a circus-like atmosphere. It happened to coincide, the beginning of it, with Mardi Gras, but that only contributed to the sense that this was a media circus.
What do you think of the treatment you're getting from the news media?
Who writes your questions? Your switchboard operator? I'll see all that.
When you come to work in the morning and you'd see in the hallway reporters from all over the world practically breaking the door down. We had to have security guards at the doors so that everybody just wouldn't come pile in. You felt this was important, what you were doing. This was important.
You had reporters from all over the United States. You even had them from Russia. And I was aware of the fact that this was being written up all over the country. Whether or not they proved the conspiracy on the part of Shaw with other people, that's a separate legal point. But I certainly thought there was sufficient evidence to warrant bringing it to trial. Let a jury decide it.
Now let me tell you why President Kennedy was murdered and how he was murdered. If you, the people of the United States, will learn the truth that the president was assassinated by men who were once connected with a Central Intelligence Agency, of course, this might reflect on the dignity of the CIA. But I happen to believe that our form of government is strong enough to survive the truth. And I believe that people of America want to know the entire truth about how their president was shot down in the streets of Dallas. And I want to assure you that as long as I am alive, no one is going to stop me from seeing that you obtain the full truth, and nothing less than the full truth, and no fairy tales.
There was a feeling that I'll never forget when the jury went out, when they were deliberating. I felt confident that we did a job we thought we had to do, and I had seen some of our hard-nosed assistants, when that jury came back with the verdict, actually broke down.
There's a number of things that I believe that Shaw testified to that I did not believe. I believe he was lying to the jury. Of course, the jury probably believed him. But I think Shaw put a good con job on the jury.
It took the jury, I think, only about a half hour to exonerate him from all charges. He was declared not guilty. Nevertheless, it ruined a man's life.
No, I think that's a fair statement. I have been financially ruined. This is not to say that I'm starving to death now, you understand. But in comparison to what I had and what I have, I've been financially ruined, yes.
That was a frivolous prosecution. It was a prosecution that was of Clay Shaw. It was dismissed almost instantly. No one other than Jim Garrison has ever tried to revive it. No one has said, other than Jim Garrison, this really is what happened or anything of the sort. I think it's a thoroughly discredited investigation.
The jury later said that they were convinced by the case that Garrison put on that there was a conspiracy in the John Kennedy assassination, but they weren't convinced beyond reasonable doubt that Clay Shaw was involved in it.
I ask you, Mr. Garrison, if you had it to do over again, would you launch another investigation?
Yes, I would have to, because once you know that something was hidden, once you know what happened, then you have no choice. But I would say that I would do it with a great deal of reluctance, because it never occurred to me that so many people would take it for granted that I would lie about such a subject. But now that I've discovered that a large segment of the American press takes it for granted that you're automatically a liar because you're elected to office, I would go in again, but I would go in with more reluctance.
I say that despite enormous adversity and terrific opposition of a secret kind from the U.S. government, Garrison nevertheless managed to get his hands on somebody who appears to have been connected somehow to this case. No, Clay Shaw was not an assassin. No, Clay Shaw probably was not even an assassin's handler. But yes, Clay Shaw, along with David Ferry and Guy Bannister did have something very definitely to do with manipulating Oswald during the summer of 1963 when Oswald was playing intelligence fun and games in New Orleans.
You know, we support our governments. Our governments are answerable to us, are accountable. That's a better word. And Jim was just trying to get at that fundamental idea that we are not content to just take the word of very powerful people, because in Jim's own words, he's seen powerful people and he's not impressed.